Paris, the city of love. But at the 2002 Paris Motor Show, Mercedes-Benz didn't confess love, they confessed speed, unveiling the world's fastest production sedan at the time, the W211 E55 AMG. Imagine a sedan that could reach 100 miles per hour in less than 10 seconds. That's pretty unreal for a 20 plus year old sedan, where the C5 RS6 took 11 seconds to reach 100 miles per hour. And even more unreal that you can drive this in daily comfort without skipping a beat, until the few, but far in between, moments of misery kick in as you're scratching your head wondering what went wrong. We'll get to that later in the video. But the W211 E-Class isn't just a past paragon of performance, it's also a pop culture icon, appearing heavily in games like Gran Turismo 4, and of course, how can you not forget Men in Black 2. Anyways, we're not here to lecture you on the history of the W211 E-Class. I'm sure there are much better videos of that on the interwebs. We're here to look at the engineering of the E55 AMG through what we call an automotive X-ray, to gauge why this car deserves a seat at the table with the greats. Each section of this video is split up into the various mechanical parts of the car, such as the engine, gearbox, dynamics, suspension, and of course, the chassis and underbody. With that being said, let's begin. To get world-class speed, you need world-class power. And that's exactly what Mercedes-Benz did with their M113 engine by adding a K at the end of it. Now, the M113K, it's a supercharged 5.4 litre V8, which makes a whopping 469 horsepower at 6100 RPM and 700 Nm from 2650 to 4000 RPM. Not only is it properly fast, it's properly torquey too, even down low, with the M113K producing 560 Nm at 1500 RPM and 650 Nm at 2000 RPM. Before we get into the specifics of the block and all that technical mumbo jumbo, let's find out why AMG fans find this engine legendary to add power to. Yes, the M113 5.5 in the previous W210 E55 AMG was also a 5.4 litre, but that's basically where the differences end. And in fact, the M113K has a much stronger bottom end for more power. The crankcase received stiffening ribs and side bolts for extra strength. A tougher, precision-balanced crankshaft that had modified bearings was also added, as well as fracture-split forged steel connecting rods, stronger than deep dish pistons that were iron-coated with oil spray cooling, and thicker wrist pins. All these changes meant the compression ratio dropped from 11:1 to 9:1. The fueling and oiling system, including the sump, catch tray and pump, and a separate oil cooler in the right hand wheel arch was also reworked, and the heads were optimized not only for better airflow, but also for higher revs, with a red line of 6500 RPM. The camshafts were lighter and more aggressive, and the valve springs were stiffened up. With all of these mods, a large Lisholm type 2.1 litre twin screw supercharger has been installed between the cylinder banks and pushes only 0.8 bar of boost. And when you combine low stock boost with a pretty low compression ratio, this means easy power gains. The supercharger uses Teflon coated aluminium shafts, which could spin at 23,000 RPM, moving up to half a kilogram of air every second, and 1,850 kilos of air per hour into the combustion chambers. However, the supercharger only worked under certain revs to save fuel, and an electromagnetic coupling and recirculating flap was used to put the engine back to no boost. The air was cooled by twin water-to-air intercoolers, which required a water pump. This pump often fails, so it's worth keeping an eye on. So what mods are out there for easy power? You can add a high performance stage 1 or 2 camshaft kit to increase top end power. You can also swatch the clutch supercharger pulley for either one of two options, overdrive pulleys or a regular non-clutch pulley. Overdrive pulleys change the gearing that drives the compressor, making the supercharger rotate even faster, meaning more air gets into your engine, which means more power. However, you might need a longer belt, but in most cases, the standard belts can cope with the adjustment at either end of pulley size, and depending on how extreme you go, the fuel system may require an upgrade as well, otherwise you risk running lean, which will cause overheating, which we'll get to later in this section. The next option is to go with a non-clutch pulley, but owners online have complained about bearing rattle noises, and with the luxurious ethos the W211 promises, we don't know if we would wholeheartedly recommend this setup for daily driving. So the block and engine specifics then, shall we? The M113K used a die-cast alloy block with 97mm bore and a 92mm stroke, so it's quite surprising how torquey this engine is for a pretty over-square design, which would focus on more power. Compared to the M11350, the M113K added in cast-in Silatech cylinder liners, an alloy cylinder head, a single overhead camshaft per cylinder bank driven by a double roller chain, 3 valves per cylinder, 2 intake, 1 exhaust, actuated by roller rockers, 2 spark plugs per cylinder, and a dual length intake manifold. Not only that, but also a twin spring assembly for the valve train, a redesigned fuel system, and a twin pipe exhaust system with switchover valve and 70mm diameter tailpipes for reduced exhaust gas back pressure. Speaking of the exhaust, have you heard the way it is cast down? Epic. Ignore the sound clips of the E55 in Gran Turismo 4. That game seriously does not do this car justice at all. Anyways, the changes made to the engine was so extensive that the M113K ended up winning the International Performance Engine of the Year for 2003. The R230 SL55 AMG also used the same engine, but made more horses at 510, with the difference in power being the E55 using a smaller diameter, longer length exhaust system. Whilst there's the good, what's the bad? When you have forced induction, which is more air being forcefully spun combined with the atmosphere, you get high heat, and over time this causes oil leaks, with the valve cover gaskets, oil cooler seals and oil pans going bad over time. The superchargers themselves have been reported by some owners on the interwebs to wear out, leading to weird noises, less power being delivered, and even supercharger failure. More issues within the motor include leaks from the thermostat and rear main crankshaft seal, failed intercooler pumps leading to high intake temperatures and reduced power, a faulty crankshaft position sensor, and the 16 spark plugs wearing out sooner than expected, although this usually happens after about 50,000 miles. Luckily, all of these issues aren't too common, and the overall engine is actually quite stout, and this can be attributed to the use of roller rockers and hydraulic lifters. The engine also heats up pretty quick, as it uses a single exhaust valve which emitted less heat into the head and more into the catalyst, getting up to temperature sooner. So we have that glorious M113K, but we need something so it operates at its best at any speed. So let's now talk about the transmission. The 5-speed auto in this car, well, it's okay. A bit lazy according to reviewers, despite claims of it being 35% quicker shifting compared to other W211 transmissions, but it really is very stout and reliable. That is, until we get to some of the issues later in the section. It's a 5G Tronic AMG speed shift transmission, which has 3 selectable modes. Standard S mode, which monitors your driving style and adapts the gear shift behavior to Z style. Comfort C mode, which lets the gearbox shift up earlier and downshift later for a more relaxed driving experience. And manual M mode, where you can change gears yourself, with first gear engaging automatically when you stop. But there's a problem with this manual mode. It auto upshifts when you hit the rev limiter, so you don't get that rev bounce of the iconic Lexus ISF. Bit disappointing, but we move. Before we get into what can go wrong, there's one reason why not much goes wrong at all. This gearbox can actually support up to 1079 Nm, so it was actually used in the W220 S65 AMG instead of the advanced 7-speed auto of the W220 S55 AMG. for cylinder applications and commercial vehicles for almost a decade. It is still being built for niche applications such as the Jeep Wrangler. So back to the bad then. Some of the earlier E55 AMG models until 2004 had issues with the radiator leaking glycol into the transmission, and this can be fixed through either a transmission flush, a new radiator, or even a valve body replacement. Owners have also reported the transmission pump eating metal and throwing shavings in the oil, but luckily the updated pump has a different kind of bearing to bypass this problem. The auto can also suffer from a torque converter shutter due to overheating or contaminated transmission fluid, as well as rust shifting from a failing conductor plate, which can wear out over time, given that this car is of course 23 years old. But all in all, these issues aren't very common at all, so let's now have a look at the gear ratios. The gearing between first and second is quite long, so acceleration from 0 to 100 km isn't the fastest, but the ratios are actually quite closely spaced from second to fifth, and that's where the E55 AMG really shines. It's a top speed machine rather than a quick off the line machine like a Tesla. Whilst fifth gear is quite short, the final drive ratio of 2.65 means that you end up cruising at lower RPMs, which fits the luxury ethos of the W211. All in all, the gear ratios are extremely well thought out, and we feel it strikes a great balance between acceleration, cruising, and reliability. It just misses the mark shifting quickly, but you gotta remember, it's a 23-year-old torque converter after all. So what if you want an E55 AMG with a manual? Then you may be in luck, with XF Motorsports selling an M113 to CD009 manual swap adapter kit. And there will be a link below to the full manual swap series for the E55, which should run you a pretty penny. Let's now move on to another aspect of the E55, the dynamics. Let's start off with the steering. Thankfully, it's a feelsome hydraulic rack and pinion setup, which included speed-sensitive power systems, and it had a relatively quick ratio as well, at 2.75 turns lock-to-lock, compared with 3.3 of the W210 E55 AMG and 2.8 of the standard W211s. Shared with the W211E class, the E55 AMG used Mercedes-Benz Sensortronic brake control system, which included a dry braking function for wet weather driving by applying regular, short brake impulses to remove water from the brake disc, increased braking pressure on the outer wheels of the vehicle when cornering, and a soft stop function which reduced the braking power as the vehicle came to rest for smooth stops in city traffic. So, whilst all of these gizmos sound really cool, this system is actually pretty unreliable, failing unexpectedly and causing braking to feel much worse. The interwebs have in fact cited wear and tear on the hydraulic pump or the SPC module as culprits, with Mercedes even themselves recalling this SPC system. In the facelift of W211, they scrapped the system altogether, replacing it with a conventional hydraulic braking system. In terms of the brakes themselves, they're pretty big, and they use vented brake discs which are 360mm by 36mm at the front with 8 piston calipers and 330mm by 26mm at the rear with 4 piston rear calipers. For the alloy wheels, they're 18x8 at the front and 80x9 at the rear. Unfortunately, Car and Driver criticised the brakes on the E55 for being difficult to modulate. Another important thing to note is the front and rear tyres being different sizes, with 245/40 ZR18 at the front and 265/35 ZR18 at the rear. This is a staggered wheel and tyre setup, and in powerful rear-wheel drive setups, these setups are almost always used, as wider rear tyres help put that power down. This is especially a good choice for the W211 E55 AMG, as it lacks a limited slip differential from the factory, which limits the difference between the left and right wheel speeds, so you can put the power down even more effectively. But this lack of LSD also means lack of front end grip in the corners, and unfortunately, according to Car and Driver, the E55 pulls a paltry 0.83 Gs on the skid pad. FYI, the heavily criticised VB-WRX was also tested by Car and Driver to pull 0.95 Gs on the skid. That's not too good. Let's now move on to the quads and hammies of the E55, the suspension. Simply put, The Mercedes-Benz W211 E55 AMG uses 4-link front suspension and multi-link independent rear suspension. The 4-link fronts replace the old double wishbones of the W210, with it having better control of camber, dive and squat. The rear multi-links were made of aluminium to cut unsprung mass, so you get better ride quality as the extra mass will drop back into the car's body when you go over potholes and speed bumps, causing a stiff ride. Also added exclusively to the E55 AMG compared to other W211s were new AMG spring struts with lower air volume for faster responses, AMG shock absorbers and stronger stabilizer with 50% greater torsional rigidity. The suspension was actually an air suspension system dubbed Airmatic DC with an adaptive damping system too, which actually used sensors to monitor steering and yaw angle, longitudinal and transverse acceleration, vehicle level and driving style to adapt the damping and springs to the situation. The E55 could also be raised significantly, and the driver could also make a manual selection from 3 different settings. When 140 km was exceeded, the suspension would actually lower the body by 15mm to reduce aerodynamic drag and return to its normal level when the speed was less than 70 km an hour. But unfortunately, it's the same story as the SBC system. Cool to play around with? Not so cool to live with. The air suspension, like most systems of its design, are prone to failure, particularly with the air struts leaking over time due to wear and tear. And you can tell if this is happening to you through uneven ride height or your suspension sagging. A failing air compressor makes things worse, and fixing these means the leaking air struts and the air compressor need to be replaced, or you can convert to a traditional coil spring setup like some owners have done for long-term reliability. So with all that doom and gloom out of the way, let's now delve into the last but definitely not least aspect of the E55, the chassis and underbody. Honestly, there's not much to cover here. The torsional rigidity of the W210 E-Class has been increased by 18%, with Mercedes opting to use more high-strength steel alloys within the W211 chassis. To cut weight, Mercedes have used lots of aluminium, from the hood, front wings, doors, truck lid, and some inner cross members. Before we conclude, let's briefly cover the E55 AMG wagon. It weighs 256 pounds more than the sedan, and Car and Driver found that it accelerated from 0 to 60 in 4.1 seconds and 0 to 100 in 9.7 seconds, which is quite shocking as the sedan did it in 9.8 seconds. We theorized that it might be due to the aerodynamics being different, but who really knows? And with that, let's head into the concluding remarks. Overall, what are my thoughts on the W211 E55 AMG? As a luxurious Autobahn cruiser, it's an excellent choice. The focus of this car was never about razor-sharp handling like an E46 M3. It's about smooth, effortless performance on the highway in an era where there really was no replacement for displacement. Of course, you have your Airmatic and SBC issues, but we feel that the M113K motor is truly one of the best AMG motors ever, so the E55 is worth a buy for that alone. Thanks everyone for tuning in and leaving kind words and incredibly helpful advice in the comments to help improve our automotive X-rays. Let us know what cars you want us to do next, and I'll see you in a bit.